Today I'm talking to Professor Pete Smith, Professor of Soils and Global Change at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, Science Director of Scotland's Climate Exchange and Editor of Global Change Biology, GCB Bioenergy, and Royal Society Open Science. Hi, Professor Smith. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today in honor of the International Day of Biodiversity this month.
No problem. Happy to talk to you.
Thank you. What does biodiversity mean?
Okay, biodiversity is a sort of a scientific term, which means something in science. It's the study of sort of like all organisms and how they interact and the diversity of those organisms. But what we take it to mean in most things when we talk about it is just used to mean nature, really. So when we talk about protecting biodiversity, we're really talking about protecting nature. So that's all birds and animals and plants that make up our living world.
That's awesome. Species can be animals, plants, fungi, like mushrooms. Protista, is that how you pronounce it?
Protista, yeah.
Protista and Monera. What are Protista and Monera?
Yes, good question. So they're just these little tiny microscopic organisms that you can't see. So the Protista are little organisms that have a nucleus. So they're the sort of things that aren't bacteria, but they're just a single cell big. They're very, very small, and you can only see them under a microscope. And the Monera are mainly things like bacteria. So they're very small. Just to give you an idea of how many there are, just in a teaspoon of soil, just from your backyard, there's more microorganisms in that teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet. So that's absolutely incredible. There are just so many of them. They're very important, but we don't even see them.
Wow. You are an author of an upcoming environmental science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystems service report. According to IPBES, 1 million species are now threatened with extinction. That's bad.
Yeah, it's very bad. Yeah.
Is that what Anthropocene? Is that how
yeah, Anthropocene, yeah. So the Anthropocene is just a way that we talk about this era that we're living in now, this age that we're living in now. We call it the Anthropocene because it's the era in which humans have had a really big influence on the planet. So as long as we've been building civilizations, we've affected the way that we use the land, we've affected the way that we interact with all animals and plants on the species, and worst of all, we've affected the climate through emitting greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why it's called the Anthropocene, because anthropo means from humans. So it's all the era in which we've developed and we've lived on this planet, and we've just affected the planet in so many ways. So one of those consequences is by affecting biodiversity. So that number that you came in, a million species which are under threat of extinction, that's as a result of what we've been doing to the planet, we as humans. So we're just one species on this planet. There are millions of others, but we're imposing sort of our way of living on the rest of the planet. So we have to find a way of living better in harmony with the rest of nature.
Yeah. People might think it's just a penguin or a bug and it doesn't affect them. Why is biodiversity important?
Yeah, I get that. So you sort of see a penguin or a bug and you think, well, that doesn't really matter, or that's miles away. But the important thing about biodiversity is that the penguin and the bug are connected to all the other organisms that live where they live. So they're just part of a big web of food and energy, and a big web of plants and animals and fungi and these microorganisms that all depend on each other to live. And they not only depend on each other, they support the ecosystems in which we live. So by taking away those pins, it's like a game of Jenga. If you've ever played Jenga, where you pull out the wooden blocks, and if you pull out too many, the whole tower falls down. So the individual species are like Jenga blocks, which are really important. And if we pull out too many, then we threaten the whole of the ecosystem and it can collapse. So it's not just single organisms. We have to think about the single organisms or species as part of a connected system.
What is hurting living things the most?
We have unsustainable farming practices, and we have unsustainable diets. We eat far too much meat and dairy, and that's driving land use change for animal production. So one of the things that's driving biodiversity loss is our ripping up of land, habitats that are used by animals and plants. We're ripping those up to plant crops and to raise animals, to feed us. So that's one thing that's affecting us. That's one thing that's affecting biodiversity in nature. And the other thing is climate change. As we continue to increase the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it leads to climate change. And that climate change is probably the biggest single threat to biodiversity that's coming up in the next 100 years. We can see it having an effect now.
Yeah. What can kids do to support and protect biodiversity?
Well, there are lots of things kids can do. You can get involved in local nature groups. If there are any nature groups near you, you can get involved with those and get involved with volunteering to do active, practical actions and going out and picking up litter, restoring your local parks and local environment. So you can do those sorts of things. But perhaps the most important thing kids can do is they can talk to adults about it. Tell the people in your life, your parents, your teachers, that you really care about nature and that you really care about biodiversity and you want to do something to help, because it's often the voice of the kids that adults listen to. So this is going to be your world. When we're dead and gone, you're the people that are going to inherit this world, and we care about it. We want to leave a good planet for you. So just make sure you talk to people and tell them how important you think nature is to you and nature is to our future survival. And that will hopefully make a change.
Yeah. What do you wish more people knew about biodiversity?
I think perhaps the most what I'd like them to know is how everything is interconnected, because people often only think about, sort of, maybe, if we lose the polar bears or we lose the pandas, that's a shame, but it doesn't really affect me. But people really have to start thinking about not just the individual species that we may lose, which is terrible enough, but these things that are all connected underpin our very existence. So the oxygen that we breathe is made by plants, we're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So all of these things are interconnected, and what we do to nature really affects our health and our well-being too. So it's not just for nature that we're thinking about things, it's for our own well-being.
Yeah. There's a biodiversity conference coming up in China later this year. The United Nations International Day of Biodiversity urges everyone to make their voices heard, to ask for a strong global biodiversity framework that will bend the curve on biodiversity loss, to show that we care about the future. How can we do that?
I think the best way you can do that as kids is to talk to the people around you, the adults who can really make their voices heard. You're too young to vote, but one day you'll be old enough to vote, and your parents and teachers are old enough to vote, and they can vote for the people who are sticking up for nature. So the politicians, we have to put pressure on the politicians to make policy, to change the world, to make laws that protect biodiversity and enhance it. And we want to say to them, we'll only vote for you if you're doing this. So you can do that as kids. You can make your voices heard to the adults, and the adults can change the way the people that are in charge and make sure that we all know that this is an important thing that we have to act on.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining me today, Professor Smith. Click the link below to donate to World Wildlife Federation. And remember, together kids can save the world. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Cheers.
Bye.